Okay guys, check it out. We have our group by and count. We are building a totals query, or summary query as it's called, and we're going to do that on our airline data that we have retrieved from Kaggle. We're getting our totals for canceled, delayed, and on-time passengers, and we are going to be looking at that query in addition to our work hours query. We're going to look at our consulting data again. We're going to do some summary queries there so that we can add things up and make things more or less granular just the way we need it. Let's do a walkthrough of Microsoft Access summary queries. I'm your host, Sean McKenzie. Thank you for joining me once again on my channel on data engineering. In this episode, we go back to our Microsoft Access playlist, and we're going to take a look at summary queries, or total queries as they might be called. Basically, we're going to be using some of the summary capabilities in SQL, and we're going to use those via the query builder in Microsoft Access. Now, summary queries are super handy and very powerful, and almost every application that you might build with Microsoft Access will use them eventually, because you need to do things like sum up column values or get averages across categories and things like that. And so Microsoft Access is very powerful for that, and you want to use these summary queries to your best advantage. Let's get to it. Looking for more resources for your project? Make sure to check out the additional links in the description. Okay guys, fun one today. We are doing a walkthrough, just some examples of how to do a summary query, or a totals query as they might be called, on some data in Microsoft Access. And check out this airline data. I got this data from Kaggle, so make sure to check out the links. I'll put the link for this data in there. And there is a flight status, and we've got an age column here and some other columns that are pretty fun for doing some data analysis on. And so this is all generated data, but we've got data from all different countries here. And I've also included a work hours table, and this is for a fictional company that is doing some consulting work, and it has some hours posted in a field here, and some work codes and employees and things like that. And we are going to use these to do a few summary queries today. Now, there are two ways that we can create our summary query. For both of them, we'll go to the Create ribbon, and we'll go to our query wizard. This will be our first example, and the wizard is the simplest method. You can click on that query wizard, and we are going to choose the simple query wizard from the list, and then you'll see that you're presented with some table or query choices there in the drop down, plus some available fields. And you can see you can choose a table or a query. That's something to note, because sometimes you want to do this on top of another query. And so we can go ahead and choose our airline data here. So let's do airline data first, and we're going to choose our nationality, and we'll do age, and we'll get the average age for all nationalities in this data table here, in this table. We'll click next, and you'll see that you're presented with this, would you like a detail or summary query? And you can click on summary because we want to make a summary of our data here, and we'll click the summary options, and there we can go ahead and choose. Now, this is where it recognizes that there's a field that's available that could be summarized, and usually that's a number. And you can optionally count the records, but we'll just say OK on that screen, and we've chosen our summary options, so we can go next. And then we can name our query here. And so we'll go ahead and give this a name. We can call it our airline query average age, and that's going to allow us to have a nicely named query there. And when we're done, we could choose to modify the query design, but we'll go ahead and click finish, and that'll give us something to look at here. And you can see the averages have very high precision there. You could put another query on top and round those off if you wanted, but you can see there's 240 countries here, and we got the average age of all airline passengers in this one query. And so you can see this is very, very handy, and you could use this in order to summarize your data for a particular field. But let's go ahead and try something different. This was nice for getting, a numeric entry. Very easy for the wizard to see that there's a number there that needs to be, averaged or summed or something like that, and we can store that in our query there. But let's do a query wizard again and try something different. We'll use the simple query wizard once again, and we are using our airline data again. And say we wanted to get the count of passengers in each flight status for each country. So we could grab our country name, and then we could grab the flight status, and then in order to count those, we can count the IDs, because we know that the IDs are unique in this case. And so we could grab the ID column and we could count that. But you'll notice when we grab these and we hit next, we're not presented with any summary options. And so that makes the wizard not particularly useful for this use case plus some other ones. And so it's a really good idea for you to learn how to make these queries using the query grid. And so we're not going to be able to use that one very well. Let's go ahead and use the query grid. It is so much more satisfying to build your own query and use that. So in this case, we're using our airline data. Let's go to the create ribbon and we'll choose our query design. Now you could choose the table here, or you can close it and drag the table on. So in that case, you would grab it here and drag it onto the query grid. But we use the selector there. And so now we have our airline data table here, and we can choose those same fields by double clicking them, and we can go ahead and try to make our query. So we'll grab the country name, the flight status, and the ID. So in this case, we're going to count the IDs that are in each flight status, and that's going to give us some idea of how many passengers are in each flight status for each country. And the big step here is that we'll go back up to the ribbon and we're going to choose that totals button there, and that's going to give us another row in our query grid. And you'll see here that we've got all kinds of things that we can choose from, and we'll choose count for the ID, and we're going to leave group by for the other fields. And so there's our ID. We can go ahead, we're going to rename that. We'll call this one passenger count. And you can give the name to your field just by typing in front of the field name and putting a colon at the end there. And you'll see that these first two fields are group bys, and then the last field uses one of the summary expressions there, whether it's sum or average or whatever. And so now we have, going left to right, we've got our country name, flight status, and passenger count. So let's go ahead and save that. Let's call this one our airline passenger status, and then we can click OK, and that will save our query for us. And we can see that one in the list in the navigator on the left hand side there. So we can click on the datasheet view and it'll give us a list of all of our countries. And you can see here we've got 704 rows in our query, and you can see it's got almost all of the countries in there that had some data in each status. So if there wasn't a status in a particular country, you won't see it there. You might see only 2 statuses or none. But this is a nice way to summarize our data. You can see all the different statuses there. We've got our canceled, delay, and on time. And you can scroll through your list and see what the numbers look like for each country. This is test data, so it's pretty meaningless for the real world, but you can see there we go, we've got 7,000 and some flights for the United States, and that is going to work for our summary query. So now you can see that you can do anything that's hierarchical. You can see that we went from country to status, and then we did the count, but you could have 4 levels of hierarchy there if you wanted. And so that's really great. So let's move on to our work hours query. So this is the table that we just pointed at there, and we can pull that over onto our query grid as opposed to using the selector like we did last time. And this time what we're going to do is we're going to add multiple measures to our query. So we could grab our company, which would be our client in this case, and we'll grab that billable hours field, and then maybe we also want to count the ID in this case. And so we might want to do some summary, some summarization there, and so we could do that using our totals query. So once again, we'll click on the totals, we'll activate that in the ribbon at the top there, and you'll see that this company is group by, and it's going to be the only group by in this first query here. And we're going to sum those hours, and then we'll count our IDs like we did in the previous query, and we'll see what we get here. So we can go up to the ribbon and choose datasheet view, and there we go. We've got our sum of billable hours and our count of individual records. And so this would be useful. We've got 124 hours there with a count of 43 entries, and we've got our companies that we've been working for: Acme Company, Arcade Mania, and Robust Systems. But say we wanted to add another measure, say the average of billable hours for each company, we could do that as well. And if we drag that into the field position that we want, it'll pop in there, but you'll see that it will default to the group by. So you need to make sure that you change that to your average or sum or whatever. That group by is very important. That's going to group the data for your sums and for your averages and for your counts in this case. And so you might be using, you know, a mean or something like that as well, and you can do that. So let's go ahead and look at the datasheet view, and there we go. We've got our average of billable hours. Again, the precision is quite high, and so you can use some methods in order to, you know, tame that display. You can create another query on top and then just round those, or you can just round it when you display it on a form or something like that. You can round it to 2 decimal places or something. Okay, so there we have it. We've got our query and we've got our average of billable hours there. Like we said, that's quite a big display, but we do have our sum of billable hours. We've got our average of billable hours. There we go. We've got our 124 and 2.8 and our 1690 with 7.2 there, or 7.3, and our count of IDs is looking pretty good there as well. So we can save that. We'll give that query a name. We'll call that our work hours summary, and that's going to show up in our query list on the left hand side in the navigator. And that is a nice way of creating a summary query for that table. And just like we talked about before, if we wanted to go modify our query, we can do that. We could go back and we could give those summary fields nicer names as opposed to sum of billable hours or average billable hours. You can call it something like total hours. Just like I showed before, you can type into the first row there of the query grid and put a colon after your name, and make sure you put that colon on the end, and there you go. We've got our total hours, our average hours, and we'll call this one entry count. And that's going to be a lot nicer to work with, and also it might show up nicer on reports and things if you give it some nice names. But that looks a lot nicer than the auto-generated field headers there, and that's exactly what we want to see. And these numbers are really great and everything. We've got those numbers, but what if we wanted to have another level of hierarchy in there? We wanted sort of a more granular split in our report or query. Say we wanted to have something in between company and total hours. We wanted to know all of these measures, but say by employee. And you can see we're using our group by, sum, average, and count. And group by is generally, it's nice to do your queries with the most or least granular on the left hand side, moving to more granular, and then put your your summary fields at the end, or your measures at the end. So I'm going to drag that employee field right after company, and then leave the measures at the end here, the sum, average, and count, and we'll show that query here. So you can see it automatically breaks it up. This Acme company entry for employee 2, 4, 5, and 6 has a nice breakdown, and you can see Arcade Mania Systems only has one row. I guess only one employee worked there, or did a contract for them, and Robust Systems only has one entry as well. And so we could do the same with other fields in there. You could do a max date or something like that by dragging those on. Those would be measures, but you can see that it's very nice and easy to build those. And if you need to go back, if you want to get rid of a column there, you can click just above the field row there and then hit the delete key on your keyboard, and it will remove that from your query. So it'll remove that column. But what if I want to filter my list? Well, you can do that as well. You can filter your list using criteria, and in this case we have the criteria row, just like your other queries that you've been doing in the query grid here. So I could say, give me everything that's like Acme in the company name. And so we could hit the data sheet view there, and you can see we've got our query with just Acme company in it. And you'll see if we remove our criteria and run our query again in datasheet view, we should have all of our companies back again, ready to rock and roll there. Now we can also add criteria to our measures, which you see here, our total hours and average hours and entry count, and we can add those measures, and we could say something like, greater than 150, and add that to our query, and that's going to filter it in the same way that the having clause works with SQL. So that's something to think about. So that means it's going to filter the data after it's been summarized. So this means after it's summarized, give me everything with the total hours in it. And we could also do something like where the entry count is greater than 200. So this is after everything's summarized, give me the total hours greater than 150 and the entry count greater than 200, and that's going to give us our filtered summarized list, and that's what we want to see there. Now you might be wondering, well, what does this look like in the background, and how does this all come out in SQL? Those of you who use SQL, you might be interested in this. So we're going to open that in SQL view. We're going to copy that because the SQL viewer and Access is not really that great, and we're going to put it into Notepad++ here, and you can put it in when you start a new tab. You can change the language to SQL and then just paste in your entry, and we'll just paste it from the clipboard, and it comes out like a bit of a mangled mess here. So let's clear that up a little bit. We're going to put one field on each line here, and there we go. So we'll put our sum for total hours, our average for average hours, and our count for the entry count, and then we'll go ahead and clean that up, and you can see how this output relates to the query grid. So there's our company, and we're grouping by company, and then we have our measures here. We got sum, average, and count, and they're all grouped by the workhours.company. And then we have our having clause, which comes after the group by statement, and it has our sum of billable hours greater than 150 and our count greater than 200. And note that that comes after it's been summarized. You can actually put a where clause between from and group by, and note that all of these brackets are necessary for Microsoft Access SQL, but they're generally not needed for SQL written for other database systems. So if you run into that, you might see that out in the wild. It is good to know if you're converting between systems or converting to Access. You might need to know that you need to add groups of bracketed entries there. So there's our query. That's how you can do summary queries in Access. Want to stop RDP spammers from hitting your remote desktop machine? Make sure to check out the additional links in the description.